Hey everyone, before we get on with today's episode, I just want to remind you that our producer Monday Abu's book, Igala Women, is now on sale on Amazon. So check out the link in the description. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Wisdom Words podcast, where each week we talk to folks who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your co-host, Neil Trivedi.
And I am your co-host, Renee O'Day. I've been gone for a little while because I had a total knee replacement. And filling in for me was the incredible Kristen. No, sorry, Dr. Kristen, you didn't fill in for me.
New here. I'm new here.
Tiana Hansen. Tiana filled in for me, and I adore her and I love her. And I'd rather be attacked in the woods by a grizzly while he was eating my heart than have that surgery again, because it was the most painful surgery in the world. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, guys, it's good to be back. And what a show to come back to.
Yes, today, we are so excited to have clinical psychologist, author, social media influencer, Dr. Kristen Casey, and to talk about something that is probably every single person can relate to at one point or another in their lives, is sleep and insomnia.
Well, how long about the last 10 years, it came into our realm that sleep is one of the most important things we can do?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like sleep is, when people talk about it, they're like, oh, it's just such a buzzkill. And when we really think about the functions of sleep, it's a necessary function, right? And it's a part of our life pie. I mean, we need sleep. Everybody does. So it's something we all share.
And your cells are actually healing while you're sleeping.
You're 100% right. So the function of sleep.
So people get that.
Yeah. There's so many functions of sleep, and you hit on the most important one is cell and tissue repair. There's memory consolidation. There's our body maintaining temperature, homeostasis. There's a lot of hormone secretion and production when we sleep. So that's why newborn babies, they sleep forever because you have hormone, right? So a lot of functions of sleep.
Well, like I said, this is an amazing show to come back to because I'm fascinated on the subject, and I would love to hear about how you got into, what piqued your interest in this specific field?
Well, it happened by accident. So I'll give you.
You were asleep and you had a dream.
I was asleep. I was in a dream state, and then it just happened. So it's really interesting. So I was an emergency medical technician before I became a psychologist, and
oh wow,
it was fun. It was fun stuff. I was a volunteer for my local first aid squad when I lived in Jersey, and nobody ever talked about sleep. Nobody ever. Like, we would do 24-hour overnights, and it was just all this craziness, and nobody slept, and we were always exhausted. And I'm like, there's got to be something that we could do. So we would just drink energy drinks. We were doing all the wrong things. So then I got into my graduate program, and I was reflecting, and I was learning all of this stuff about the purpose of sleep and everything like that. And I was like, whatever, how people say, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead, or I don't need it. So I just drank the juice. I was like, yeah, this is what we do in America. We just work and we don't sleep. So then I had to do my clinical internship, my doctoral internship at the VA. It was one of the best training experiences of my life.
Wow.
And my supervisor was like, I need you to run this sleep group. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, that sounds so boring. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Can you give me anything else? Anything else I will do. And she's like, no, it's required. So Jenna, if you're listening to this, thank you for influencing me. So I did the sleep class, and I fell in love. I just fell in love with the fact that people get better so quick. It was cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is the first line treatment right now for chronic insomnia, which is incredible. And I was doing the treatment alongside my clients. They didn't know this, right? I'm like, let me test this out. Let me make sure this works. And I had no sleep issues after that. Like, my sleep issues were very minimal. I was sleeping through the night. I wasn't having frequent awakenings. I woke up feeling more refreshed. And it was all these tactics that they sound pretty obvious, but when you actually implement them, they're very difficult. I mean, it's hard to do this stuff. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then I fell in love, and now here I am. So
on paper, right, everyone seems to know what insomnia is and how we define it. But can you tell us from a scientific perspective, what exactly is it? Like, how does it affect our mind, our sleep cycles? How would you describe insomnia in medical / scientific terms?
Yeah, insomnia has a lot of clinical implications. So technically, chronic insomnia and acute insomnia are two separate diagnoses. They're two different things. So when we think about insomnia, it's difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up before our intended alarm, or having a serious dissatisfaction with the quality of our sleep. So usually all four of those things are present for at least 3 days a week for at least 3 months. It's chronic insomnia. Anything less than that is acute insomnia. Acute insomnia is kind of like jet lag. Okay, I had a rough night of sleep. It's over. It's not really that big of a deal. Yeah. People are able to kind of recoup and they're able to move on. But when it's chronic insomnia, it always leads to further assessment. So sleep issues, for other therapists and psychologists out there listening, we do know that sleep issues are part of many different diagnostic categories: depression, anxiety, everything, right? So when I think about insomnia just by itself, there's a genetic component. If you're a woman or you have someone in your life, a first degree biological relative who has insomnia, you're more likely to have insomnia. If you have anxiety, you're more likely to have insomnia as well. So it does have a genetic component. We do notice, though, that there are these predisposing factors like that. There's also these predictive factors as well that that move insomnia along. So divorce, transition surgery, stuff like this, right? Like all these things happen, and then it causes disruptions in our sleep. On paper, when we look at insomnia, if we get less than about like 7, I'm talking adults here. So the National Sleep Foundation recommends that we have 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. I like to look at more than that than just a number, because you could get 7 to 9 hours of broken, horrible sleep and wake up exhausted. And then you might think you're meeting the mark and you're not. You're actually wrecking your body, right? Like I'm not actually restoring all the processes that we were talking about earlier. And from a scientific standpoint, I do think that lack of sleep really affects a lot of things. We notice that people who have chronic insomnia over the course of their life that's untreated, there's a higher risk of accidents, cardiovascular, stroke, metabolic issues, hormone issues, all these things, weight gain, the list goes on and on. So you can imagine that sleep is really important. And yet I think our culture doesn't really promote good sleep. So that's why I'm just happy to be here to talk about it. So.
Well, trust me. I mean, like I said, this is just conversation that I wanted to have with someone for a long time. It's near and dear to my heart because I do have 2 sisters. Actually, one has passed away from that have chronic insomnia, and I couldn't understand it. Yeah, I was like, why? What is going on in there? It could just be anything, right? It could be depression that is triggering it. Rather hormonal.
You're right. You're 100% right. I mean, we just don't know all the time. And not everybody who experiences stress or hormone issues will necessarily have insomnia, but we do notice that there are people out there who really do struggle. I notice around menopause time as well, hot flashes and all that stuff, it wrecks sleep, right? Because when we sleep, our core body temperature actually decreases in order to get us into deeper stages of sleep. So if you're having those hot flashes and your body is not able to regulate temperature, it's likely that you'll wake up. So.
And motherhood.
And oh my gosh, my heart goes out to mothers. When you have a child in general, what is sleep, right?
Like one of the key things that I've heard you talk about in previous interviews, podcasts, things like that, and I found this personally very interesting, is using classical conditioning, right, as a method to combat either insomnia or sleep issues. So can you elaborate on that? Because I'd never really heard about that or read about that until I heard you speak about it. And I know you said ideally, in an ideal situation, someone should just be using their bed for sleep and sex, which I found very interesting perspective. So yeah, get into that. What is that all about, and how does it help us?
That's a great question. And it's one of the pieces of insomnia treatment. I'm pulling from cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So part of that protocol, we look at people's sense of arousal, which is a fancy word for anxiety, when they get into their bed. If they notice that they're kind of lying in bed, they're bed lounging and they're not able to fall asleep, usually it's one of 3 things. It's either anxiety. It doesn't have to be worry. It's just kind of like thinking about things, that maybe aren't even worrisome. Your brain is just going. I know a lot of us could relate to that. Like you just can't stop your brain from, thinking. The second thing is sleep drive. So the body's biological need for sleep. So if you know, just say you were sedentary all day, and the night before you slept like 15 hours and you took a nap that day and you're drinking a bunch of caffeine, it's unlikely that your body will actually need sleep at the time that you are hoping to go to sleep. So the sleep drive might influence that. And the third thing is circadian rhythm. So it's our natural sleep-wake cycle. So if you're waking up at different times throughout the day, that kind of causes melatonin secretion to vary throughout the day as well. We can't really predict when we will be tired. And then you'll get into bed at like a normal time, right? Like depending on what your preferred bed window is, and then you're kind of lying there awake, and it's like really frustrating. So when I think about classical conditioning, and for those who are listening who might not be aware of this, if you Google Pavlov and the dog experiment, Pavlov was a psychologist, and he talked a lot about trying to pair a neutral stimulus with another stimulus. And basically what that means is he wanted to pair a bell and food for dogs without actually having the food out. And then they started to salivate just by the ring of the bell rather than even seeing the food. So he knew, wow, like we could condition people and dogs and mammals basically to respond in a certain way based on the pairing of these two things. So the same thing happens with sleep. So if you go into bed and you're mentally pairing the sleep with wakefulness, you're mentally pairing the bed with, this is where I argue with my partner. This is where I think about my finances. This is where I think about microaggressions. This is where I think about discrimination. This is where I think about all these things. Then it's unlikely that is going to help you sleep. Most of this happens automatically and we don't realize it's happening. So the key here is only using the bed for sleep and sex. It's called stimulus control. You're only using it for one or two things. And we notice that when we do that, our parasympathetic nervous system is more likely to be engaged than our sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is our relaxation response. It's like you parachute away from your stress. That's how I remember it. The sympathetic nervous system.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
That is, I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Okay, where's that pen I never seem to have? Because I'm writing that one down.
This is the only way I remember this stuff for my licensing exam. So, and then the sympathetic nervous system is your stress response. It's that fight or flight, right? So it's very likely that when you get in bed and you are awake, that sympathetic nervous system is in the forefront. So in order to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, we have to kind of do a little more work. And it might be only getting into bed when you have those internal cues of sleepiness, like you're nodding off, you're zoning out, you're on the couch, falling asleep, those things. You're not going to get into bed when you are already anxious. You're not going to get into bed when, you know, you're thinking about all these things. So, and I say ideally, and I'm really happy that you mentioned that word, because this is not possible for everybody. To be able to work on our sleep in a certain way is sometimes a privilege. So it really depends on where we're coming from. There might not be people that have the opportunity to do these things. So any closeness that you could get to that is ideal. You know, you have to work with what you got.
Well, you're a big proponent of routine, right?
Yes.
You know, like doing things to get you ready for getting into bed. Now, let's say you do those things and within 20 minutes, you're not asleep. What would you recommend from there? And what are some of the things you recommend to do prior to getting into bed?
I love this question. What you're talking about is a buffer time. So a buffer time is the time right before we get into bed. And that's crucial. It's crucial for people with anxiety too. So you want to really set the mood. So if you ever kind of walk into a restaurant or you walk into like a place of business and you just say they have really nice candles, it's likely to put you in like somewhat of a different mood. You're like, oh, this smells nice. The environment's nice, right? So we're really, really, really in tune with those sensory experiences. So we want to lower the lights. We want to kind of create an environment that is like peaceful and calming and all of that if possible. You know, if you have roommates or kids and animals, I mean, sometimes that's not possible, right? So you do your best. And then right before you get into bed, I always like to tell people, do an assessment. Think about your internal cues of sleepiness. Think about how sleepy you actually are, because sleepiness and tiredness are two separate things. Sleepiness is I need sleep. Tiredness is I need to relax. Two separate things.
Where is that pen?
Yeah. So if you're tired, if you're just exhausted and you're shot, just say you're a single working mom, right? And you go to work all day, then you have to take care of the kids afterwards, and then you're kind of going. It's going to be hard, you know, for you to think about, okay, like I'm just so tired. I'm so tired. And you might want to just go to sleep. What your body really needs is relaxation. What your body really needs is to kind of just slow your mind while you're awake, so you could deal with all the things that are in your mind, because then your body has to work twice as hard when you sleep with memory consolidation and all of that. So during that buffer time, I like to set a timer for at least 60 minutes, an hour. And again, if this is an opportunity that people have, if not 30 minutes will suffice, you look at all this, you do a really good sleep assessment. If you're not tired, you don't get into bed. And people hate me when I say that, and that's okay. You can hate me, I'll take it. But I think really just focus on the wake time. Our bedtimes is sometimes not what we could control because we have stressors, we have anxieties, we have stuff going on, but you have more control over setting an alarm, waking up to that alarm, not hitting snooze. It sucks, but you have more control over that than you do about getting tired.
And Neil, I'm gonna add on to this question. Sorry. But,
yeah, no, go ahead.
Go for it.
So I'm about to disappoint a lot of men out there, but alcohol is a no-no to use as a sleep inducer, right?
You're right. So it depends on everybody's sleep goals, right? So we notice that alcohol reduces the latency to fall asleep. So the time it takes us to fall asleep usually decreases. However, alcohol is a toxin to our body technically when we think about it from a scientific standpoint. So our body is going to work really hard to get that out of our bloodstream.
Is that what it's doing?
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So when we metabolize alcohol, our body has to work, our liver has to work, all these things have to happen. And it's unlikely that will provide us with restful sleep because our body's focused on this toxin rather than the restorative nature of sleep.
Yeah. So there are little men in your liver pushing it out with the broom.
Exactly. There's little minions in there like, let's get this out.
That's physical, right? Much of what you talked about setting the schedule, routine, but how about that mind, that chattering mind that never stops, worrying, and the pessimism that comes, and sometimes anxiety, like you mentioned. What are some things that you recommend to combat that?
Yeah. So you're right. Everything I mentioned before is behavioral, things that you could kind of physically notice yourself doing. When it comes to the cognitive and emotional and mental part, those are a little more tricky for people. And usually we spend a lot of time in sleep treatment working on these things. So the first thing that I suggest for people with that arousal or anxiety right before bed is it's called scheduled worry time. It's a tactic from cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And we use it in other modalities as well, but it has 3 parts. So the first part is worry identification. So you're noticing, okay, I'm worrying, I'm anxious, I'm thinking too much, like there's a lot going on here and I can't control my thoughts. The second is worry delay. So you're actually going to delay yourself from thinking about these things until your scheduled worry time. And the third part is actually engaging in that scheduled worry time. So what we suggest, is not having scheduled worry time in bed, not having it in bed, not having it close to bedtime, but at a time that's really neutral, that you have space to consider these things that isn't going to impact your sleep. So it might be during the day. I do this every day. So what it looks like for me is around like 1 or 2 p.m. every day, I'll kind of sit down and I'll think about all the things that are bothering me. I'll just let myself worry. Like I will let my mind, worst case scenario, just let it go, let it roll. Right. And then you'll notice that in that time frame, you'll either come up with solutions or you won't. Like you'll come up with solutions for those anxiety things, or you just won't. And for the things that you can't, you have to kind of take the L, and you're like, okay, there's no viable solutions. I got to let it go. I just have to let it go. Thinking about this any more than I am is not actually going to be helpful. It's where my mind wants to go, but it's not helpful. So you kind of table it. And then if you start thinking about that same thing right before bed, you've already worried about it. I'm putting it in really simple terms, but you've already worried about that so much. Worrying anymore is actually not going to do you any good. So you just remind yourself of that. This skill is one that takes a lot of practice, but it really does help.
Now, when I find that I can't sleep, I turn to apps, breathing apps. Okay. Because that is just something I've conditioned my body to do. What are your thoughts on medication and like over-the-counter medications and apps and stuff like that?
Yeah. I love that you brought up apps, and I love that you brought up breathing, because diaphragmatic breathing is one of the most helpful and effective strategies for anxiety. Like if you could regulate your breathing, then you could regulate your heart rate. If you could regulate your heart rate, you could regulate a lot of other things going on in your body. And likely it's helpful for anxiety and worry and all that. I always suggest not using the apps in bed, but then at the same time, if it's going to help, it's going to help. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So if it's going to help you in bed, it's going to help you fall asleep, just do it. Just do it. No big deal.
Do it.
When we think about medications, medications are usually clinically indicated for acute insomnia or other sleep disorders. There's over 70 sleep disorders. So for chronic insomnia, the first line treatment is the behavioral interventions that we're talking about today. It's very unlikely that medications will be super useful for someone with chronic insomnia, but it's not to say they're ineffective completely. So how I look at medications, and I'm not a prescriber, by the way, I work with physicians and psychiatrists on this one with my clients. If it's acute insomnia, I'm jet lagged, I'm in a different time zone. For some reason, I just have to like get back on a sleep cycle. Over-the-counter medications are not harmful. So diphenhydramine is usually the drug of choice, which is Benadryl and ZQL, it's the same drug. So people will use that to kind of start, getting on a better schedule to set their circadian rhythm. And that could be super useful. I've done it before too. You have that hangover effect the next day, but it helps, it helps you get back on track. Psychotropic medications for sleep could range all the way from benzodiazepines all the way to off-label antidepressants. And one of the biggest off-label antidepressants that we use is trazodone. And sometimes with trazodone, we do notice that people start to rely on the medication rather than their own internal natural cues for sleepiness. And that's kind of the thing we're trying to teach people of listen to your body. Like when you're doing those breathing exercises, you're listening to your body and what it needs, right? And you've conditioned yourself to do those things, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. So medication is helpful in certain circumstances, but I always love when people are able to do this on their own, because there might be a time when you don't have access to that medication. Maybe you run out or, something like that.
Yeah. So this is when I told my mom I'm doing a podcast episode on sleep and insomnia, and she was very keen that I ask you this, because this is a problem that she's had for years, pretty much since her childhood. Is she has this problem where she doesn't have too much trouble falling asleep, but if she wakes up in the middle of the night, and she's a really light sleeper, she just cannot fall back asleep no matter what, like breathing, deep breathing or meditation, nothing works. So what is that like? What does that entail? Where does that come from? And are there?
She needs to get up and bake you some cookies.
All right. So first line treatment would be baking cookies. No, I'm kidding. I love that. I love that.
Here's my address.
Here it is. So for people who have frequent awakenings overnight that are those really long awakenings, it is jarring, right? Like you can't get back to sleep. It's frustrating. And then there's that same guilt component of like, oh my gosh, there's just something wrong with me. Why can I just get to sleep? And people talk to themselves really in a very not compassionate way, right? It's just not a fun experience. So when I think about this, I always like to assess. It's not one size fits all for everyone. We normally have at least 1 to 2 awakenings, like healthy, normal, functioning adults, whatever that is. I don't know anybody who's healthy and functioning and normal, but for those people, 1 to 2 awakenings per night is normal, right? So if you're having if you're kind of waking up and you're kind of going back to sleep and it's just a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, that's normal. If it's anything over 15 to 20 minutes and you are awake, it leads me to believe that the body, you're going through some sleep cycles and it might not actually need sleep. You might be going through a couple of sleep cycles. You might be falling asleep earlier than intended, right? And then you're hoping to wake up, just say you're falling asleep at 10 p.m. and then you're hoping to wake up at 8 a.m. I mean, that's a really decent amount of sleep for someone. To not have any awakenings, I would be pretty confused. I'd be like, wait, what's going on? So if she is up in the middle of the night, I would always like to see how tired were you before you went to sleep? What is your sleep drive like? Like how active were you? Were you walking around? Were you sitting at a desk? Was your mind, were you engaged intellectually, mentally, emotionally throughout the day? What is all that like? So there's a bunch of factors, but I like to look at, sleep consolidation. So if she's looking to get that consolidated sleep, everybody has different sleep goals. If you want that consolidated sleep, you might have to look at your bed window. And what we do is find out, again, this is a very simplistic version, but for people who are like, I need to wake up at 6 a.m. every day. That's like my thing. So if you need to wake up at 6 a.m. and you traditionally sleep about 7 hours, you count back from 6 a.m., 7 hours. I suck at math. So 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 12, 11 p.m. would be the earliest bedtime. Absolute earliest time you never actually get into bed. It's not the bedtime, it's the earliest bedtime. So if you're at 11 o'clock and you're not noticing those internal cues of sleepiness, guess what? We're not getting into bed, right? You have to wait. People hate me with this. You could hate me again. I don't care. Whatever. I just want your sleep. So get into bed later, right? Get into bed later. And then you might have anxiety about that, right? But it's likely that you'll get more consolidated sleep rather than having those awakenings. So again, this is just one way to assess for this.
Yeah.
You had mentioned circadian rhythms earlier. What is the best way to change your sleep cycle? Because it does take a little period of time. Like you can't just say, I'm just going to start sleeping from 11 to 6 every day. If you've been sleeping from, 8
right.
to 2.
Right.
For example.
You're right. 100% right. You cracked me up, by the way. I'm trying not to laugh. But so you're right. You're right. It doesn't happen overnight either.
It's the pain, man. No.
It's life. It's life. So you're right. You're right. So it takes time. So I always like to figure out what is your natural sleep-wake cycle? Like where do people normally fall? And we notice that sometimes people have advanced or delayed phase sleep syndrome, which is another sleep disorder. Sometimes they tend to be night owls or morning people, right? So that's like where your body naturally lies. We like to work with the body, but sometimes that's not possible with like kids and school and work and all that stuff, right? So the best ways to figure this out and to regulate this is two things. Exposure to light immediately when you wake up and consistency. So waking up at the exact same time every day. Again, this is not possible for shift workers. It's not possible for everybody, right? This is just general recommendation. If you're able to do that, then your body will have predictable signs of melatonin secretion, all these things. The biological process that happens when we wake up at the same time every day doesn't only affect our circadian rhythm, it affects everything. Bowel movements, gastrointestinal stuff, hormone secrete, like everything, like down to like when your body has a dip in core temperature, So our bodies will operate similar to almost like a machine if we wake up consistently. So the background story about circadian rhythms is if we think about the hypothalamus, there's a part in there, there's a cluster of like not a couple of cells, I think it's like 20,000 cells. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that suprachiasmatic nucleus regulates our sleep-wake cycles. And the SCN, basically how we regulate that is exposure to light and consistency, because it's very, 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 very reptilian, right? So if you notice, when we have daylight savings time, which is going to go away, November 2023.
Thank you.
Yes, I know. I'm so excited. Super excited for that. But you notice in the wintertime, those 4 months of like, when it's getting darker and, it's getting darker earlier, you just start to notice you're a little more groggy. That's why, because whenever there's exposure to light or not, our brains think, oh, that was time to be awake. Melatonin secretion stops and all the other things happen. Cortisol levels spike a little bit, adrenaline, all that. So light is really important. Consistency is really important. So that's like the main thing that we focus on. Again, everybody's different, but that's the one thing that I love. That's my favorite part of sleep treatment is like, let's figure out your circadian rhythm. Where is it? And then if you want to change if you want to change it, right? That was your question, your original question. How do we change it? So you get on a consistent cycle, right? And try to get a baseline. And then you pull back. We like to pull back 15 minutes like a week or 30 minutes a week. Our bodies are very, very sensitive. If you want to do this quick, you're likely to have all those really, really negative effects like headaches and you're groggy all day and you're fatigued. So we always suggest, okay, if you want to change it and you want to wake up later or earlier, then you switch it by 15, 30 minutes per day. Obviously under supervision is the best, but that's what we start with.
Yeah. Is there an average time of like generally how long it takes people to reset, or does it just vary from individual to individual?
It depends on the individual, because I like to think about the person as more than just their sleep issues, right? So when I think about someone and I just think about insomnia, I think about what does this person deal with every day? Is this person experiencing things that are outside of their control that impact sleep, like stress? And some of the stressors that they experience might be systematic racism. It might be, all these other things that are absolutely uncontrollables, So we process those, we figure out how to kind of come to terms with some of these things, even though it's hard to, and usually stress kind of, decreases from there. But it really just depends on the person. And then we also notice that if there's comorbid conditions, like if someone has PTSD or someone has potentially like a mood disorder, like bipolar disorder, a lot of times we notice that it takes a little longer because they're dealing with a lot of other things. But if it's just insomnia, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia usually lasts around 6 weeks. It's pretty quick treatment compared to the other evidence-based treatments that we have. So I noticed that people have enhancements in their sleep scores, usually around week 3-ish, if I could kind of come up with an average, 3 or 4. And then from there, it's kind of maintaining, and changing, each, changing recommendations after that. But yeah, usually around, like if you're under supervision and you're really, really working on this and people are doing like sleep assessments for you, it is a little quicker. If there are people out there who are listening who are like, hey, I'm going to implement some sleep strategies, it might take a little longer, because you have to do hit or miss, figure out what works for you.
Another thing that fascinated me when you talked about is how sometimes you have to get people you work with to be patient, right? And let them say that, okay, this is not, you can't try one thing and come back like 48 hours later and say, no, it doesn't work. It didn't work. So can you explain the importance of patience in people who are trying some of the new things to like regulate their sleep and get rid of or try to prevent insomnia? How important is that to be patient and realize that, okay, there are no overnight solutions and it will take time?
Is that an oxymoron, like free rent, patience and sleep?
Right. I'm so happy you mentioned it, because I think there's two components that I really try to drive home for people. It's patience, like you said, and also self-compassion. Like, you're a human being in this world right now, and it's really hard out there, and you're dealing with a lot of things. Everybody has a really unique set of circumstances. And I think it's important to kind of acknowledge, if life were perfect, it's likely your sleep would be too. Life's not perfect, right? So life's not perfect. So it does take a lot of patience. And I think, honestly, people, at least the people that I work with, are incredibly resilient people, and they're incredibly proactive in their health, right? And a lot of people that I talk to really just want to get better. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that that's going to take time, but also you might be your own worst enemy. Like, you might be the person that's really trying to focus on sleep, but then also saying to yourself, like, I do want to go out with my friends and drink on the weekend, or I do want to stay up late to watch this show. And that's okay. You can't expect yourself to just rebound after that. You have to maintain your expectations based on what you're giving yourself. So it is expectation management. And that's kind of goes with the self-compassion thing of, like, if you want to go on a bender with your friends on a Friday night, it's unlikely that you're going to wake up at 6 a.m. on Saturday. You're probably still going to be at the bed. So you make choices, and some of those choices, wreck your sleep cycle, and then you just get back on it. It's no big deal. You also have to weigh, do I want to have fun with my friends, or do I want to, stay up, or do I want to go on this trip or something like that? Or do I want good sleep? And a lot of times when you choose sleep, sometimes you do lose out on the really good things in life, like spending time and connecting with people, and that's okay. You have to make choices. Patience is also really helpful, because I noticed that a lot of people are unlikely to acknowledge the things that they are doing well, because they're so focused on the negatives. And I'm sure all of us could relate to this, of like, we're just always focused on risk assessment. How can I do better? How can I grow? What's wrong? Because we're wired to, our brains are wired to keep us safe, not keep us happy. So it's going to really look for things that are negative. And I think when I'm with people in treatment, they never talk about the things they're doing well. And I'm like, wait, hold on. We're just not going to speed past this. These are all the things that you're doing well. These are all the things that you're right? Well. Yeah. Like, let's celebrate that and like look at the data. And I like looking at the data, because sometimes people forget how much effort this takes and how far they've come. And when we look at the data, even if it's like their sleep efficiency score goes up by like 5%, that is a huge win in the sleep world. For them, they're like, yeah, it's only 5%. I'm like, 5% is like
it's something.
It's something.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, like, I would love to know, you said life is never perfect for anyone, right? So even for someone such as yourself, who does have so much experience and many years of experience, and this is your main, or one big area of expertise, do you personally still ever get those bad nights of worries, or staring at your phone, or counting the cracks? Does that ever happen?
Oh yeah. More often than I like to admit, but I'm pretty transparent. So I still have insomnia issues. They wax and wane depending on what's going on in my life. I know with the COVID pandemic, hit me really hard. I had a lot of sleep issues, a lot of stress, being a psychologist and a therapist in a helping profession and helping people.
Doesn't look like you put on a pound though.
Thank you. I did. I definitely did, but thank you.
I'm 25 pounds here, and
I know people experienced a lot of weight gain during the pandemic, because I think we were trying to figure out how to cope, right? Like, we just didn't know what to do. And I think there are moments and periods of time in life and where it's more stressful than others, right? And then usually our sleep suffers because we're trying to figure things out. And I think we have to have grace with ourselves. But I have at least 1 to 2 nights of really bad sleep per week. And it's usually a product of, I'm thinking about the world. I'm really into, what's going on in the world and stuff. And those are usually the things I keep, because they're uncontrollables. You can't control those things. But the thing that I can control is not being so hard on myself. It's trying to wake up around the same time every day. It's having grace with myself, also seeing myself as a human. I'm not above anything just because I have a doctorate degree. We're all the same, you know, in terms of struggling.
Really? I thought you were a robot. Check that one off.
That would be so nice. That would be so nice.
Like, just push a button and
yeah.
You know, you're out like that.
Right. But my sleep issues have gotten way better over time. Like I said before, like working shift work, being an EMT, being a first responder, that was a really, really difficult part of my life that I was seeing a lot of trauma. And it was just really, really hard to get a good night's sleep. I still think about some calls that I've been on, and it's really hard to go to sleep at night, but you have to just have some patience. Like you said, you have to have patience with yourself and notice how far you've come. Like I don't go days without sleep anymore. I do have trouble getting to sleep, but I don't really wake up as much throughout the night. So you have to look at all the wins. You have to look at the celebratory
moments. Do you believe in, like you said, like, okay, so let's say you have a job as like a emergency room physician, and like you're constantly going, but like, maybe you can catch a 15-minute nap here and there. Do you think that is a way to go?
That's I love this question. So that's safety naps. So when we think about napping, I know a lot of providers are anti-naps because they want people to get consolidated sleep at night. It really depends on your profession and your sleep. Everybody has a different goal when it comes to sleep. Some people want that consolidated, 7 to 9 hours a night. Some people don't have the option for that because they're working shift work or they're emergency medical, in some sort of crazy field. And a 15-minute nap is actually going to be very rejuvenating. So we do suggest safety naps. And a safety nap really is, how can I get a little bit of rest before I have to continue working, especially for people who work, they're drivers and they're behind the wheel of a car, people who are exhausted and have sleep deprivation. It's very similar to having, alcohol. It has like the same similar effects. Like you're drowsy, you can't focus, perception is a little off. So yeah, we do suggest even 30-minute naps. Doesn't really wreck your sleep drive. And sometimes I tell people you might have to make a choice between two pretty shitty decisions. It's either having a nap because you need to work and you need to take care of your kids, or you're up a little later. I mean, you got to figure it out, but usually the naps are okay.
How big of an effect is the effect of blue light? Because nowadays there's so many talks on, our digital screens give us blue light, which is bad, and it makes us, and so a lot of people do things like wear blue blockers, and I've been doing that too now at night, and like even a darker phase than this, because I've been in the color therapy, and it actually seems to be working. I don't know if it's just a placebo effect or not, but I do find myself yawning when I wear the blue blockers at night. So how effective or ineffective is that to our sleep as far as blue light is concerned?
Yeah, so with blue light, that's still a topic of further research. We're still looking at all of that. There are research studies out there that do support that blue light. It's important to, limit that before bedtime or, at night. And it could really help with those internal cues of sleepiness and getting your brain into a phase of like, okay, we're not gonna, or we're going to fall asleep a little easier. I think, like you said, part of it might not necessarily be a placebo effect, but we might start to notice things in a different way. So if we are mindful about, okay, this is blue light, or okay, let me dim the lights, or okay, let me do all these things, then we're actually training our body. It's that conditioning thing. Like we're training our body to get tired at a certain time. So that might be part of it as well. This is my hypothesis. This isn't like super validated in the research. I just want to make a note of that. But I think with light in general, our bodies are so sensitive to light, like beyond sensitive. So, and it's very, very reptilian. Our brain, we think there's part of our brain that's cognitive, like we're able to kind of articulate things and talk and communicate like receptive and expressive language. And then there's parts of our brain that are only concerned about light and consistency, like the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So if we think about light in general, if we're limiting blue light or light in general, then our brains are going to think it's time to go to sleep. It's going to think, okay, now we have to start the orchestrated process of getting to sleep. Whereas if you wake up and you expose yourself to light, great. With blue light in general.
And it makes you happy.
It does. It does. It makes you really happy.
It makes you happy.
Yeah, exactly.
I like light. When we bought our house, they have these kind of like vaulted ceilings, and they have, like windows. And I was like, sold.
Oh my gosh.
There's no floor. The floor is dirt.
It does not matter. It does not matter.
I like those windows. Can you talk about the stages of sleep?
Yeah, certainly.
this is fascinating to me.
Totally.
The stages.
Yeah. So when I think about sleep architecture, I think about, we have REM and then we have non-REM 1, 2, and 3, and 4, depending on the research now. They're still researching this part. So with the REM is our most active stage of sleep. And what happens during REM, every stage of sleep is very important. So I think sometimes people tend to think like, oh, I need just deep sleep. You do, but you also need the other stages. That's why they're there. So different things happen in different stages of sleep, and how we denote the different stages of sleep are by brain waves. So depending on where we are, I'm trying to remember all the brain waves. There's beta waves, alpha waves, theta waves, delta waves. Delta waves are usually synonymous with those deeper stages of sleep, like that slow wave sleep. So if you're hooked up to a polysomnography where they have all the cords on you and they're looking at your sleep cycles and your sleep architecture, it's likely that you'll have delta waves when you're in deeper stages, and then beta waves when you're a little more awake. And then there's a change in your breathing, body temperature, all those things. So with REM sleep, we have a tendency to remember our dreams as well, because it's very active. So our brain is like doing a lot of memory consolidation, thinking about where to put all the information that happened throughout the day. And a lot of times if people have a REM sleep behavior disorder or something like that, they might have a tendency to act out their dreams, like sleepwalking, sleep talking. That usually happens during REM. It could happen during other stages, but it's likely to happen during that stage. But the reason why we don't act out our dreams in REM is because our body goes into atonia, which our muscles become paralyzed during that stage of sleep, so that it keeps us safe, so that we don't act out our dreams. Some people don't have that ability though, depending on the person. And then the deeper stages of sleep, and 1, 2, and 3, really depends on the person, depends on the age, so babies, they stay in REM way more than we do, and then it flip-flops over time. So the stages and the architecture changes as we age, and we notice that people need a lot less sleep as they age too. So people who are really elderly, going through potentially treatments, chemotherapy, I'm thinking of people who are oncology patients, they might need less sleep, but if they are going through treatment, they might need more. So it just depends on your circumstances too. But the stages of sleep are really important because a sleep cycle will last anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes. And sometimes when people say, oh gosh, I keep waking up at like 3 a.m., I mean, that could be arousal, sleep drive, circadian rhythm. It could also be that your body is coming out of a stage of sleep and it's just becoming more awake as time goes on. And we're more likely to be in REM sleep towards the latter end of the night because it's a more active stage. And our body is preparing for its final awakening. So we notice that if we are in REM sleep, we're in more REM sleep towards the latter end of the night. So all that to say, it just varies with the timing, your age, where you're at in life, what you're dealing with, all those things. And also, the stress levels that you have. I'm writing a book on sleep right now, actually. And a lot of what I'm focusing on actually is stress. And people don't realize how much stress actually implicates those sleep architecture, their sleep architecture in general. It's crazy. So
you have a book out, right? One that is already out, or?
Yeah. So I have.
You have a copy of it?
Can you hold it up? It's right there. But yeah, this is on Amazon, Life Lessons to Master Before You Die. And then I'm in the process of writing a book that'll drop during Sleep Awareness Week in March 2023. It's all about sleep. And it incorporates a lot of the things that we talked about today, really digestible ways to implement sleep strategies without worrying about all this literature that's out there because it's so overwhelming. So I take all of that and I kind of just put it into a book. So that's going to come soon.
Wait, sweetie, where can people find you? Your social media accounts and stuff?
Yeah, so I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. I have a YouTube account that I barely use, but you could find me at Dr. Kristen Casey, DrKristenCasey. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I really had this is such a joy. Thank you.
This has been, I could not have come back to a better episode. And I didn't think about my pain once. What? Okay. Anyway, Dr. Kristen, you really just made my day. And the conversation was great, and I learned so much, and I can't wait to have you back. Right, guys?
Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Kristen Casey, for coming on. You were a joy and just the best guest I could have ever come back to for my first show back. And I can't wait to have her on again.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at all the links listed in the description. And don't forget to hit like on this video and subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. Thank you, everyone, once again, and we will see you right here next week, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard. Bye.